Who are you, really? And where does your sense of who you are come from? In Pixar's movie Inside Out 2, we get to see inside the brain of a 13-year-old girl named Riley. We see an internal family system of personalities that make up Riley's emotions, and we see the complex core of who Riley is, her very sense of self. This sense of self is created by Riley's beliefs and memories, and the movie is a beautiful story about growing up and developing tools for positive mental health. One thing the movie doesn't mention, though, is that a lot of the input that forms a person's belief system, which in turn creates their sense of self, comes from people in power. People who make laws and rules and tell stories that tell all of us how to be safe and how to be a good person in the world. And in a patriarchal society, most of those people are men. So what is the impact on a girl and woman's self-concept if the sources of her very sense of self are the thoughts and opinions and beliefs of men? And once that male-created selfhood has been formed, is there any way to undo it? I started piano lessons when I was 4 years old, and I was obsessed with classical music throughout my childhood. In about 4th grade, my favorite composers were Mozart and Beethoven, and as I would set my piano books on the piano, I would greet the composer in my mind, bowing to him and asking him to be with me and to accept my offering as I tried to do justice to his work. I know this sounds so weird, but I felt Mozart and Beethoven kind of hovering around me, sometimes very impressed with my playing, but at other times disappointed. Whenever I made a mistake, I would say sorry out loud to Beethoven. This is true. My other obsession as a child was religion. I was raised in a very devout religious family, and as you may have noticed from the piano story, I was the kind of kid who took things really seriously. I felt the presence of God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost with me at all times. The founder of my religion taught that the members of the Trinity are literally men, as in males, not genderless spirits. And joining them in my head were biblical heroes like Moses and David and Paul, and Book of Mormon heroes like Nephi and Alma and Moroni. It is not an exaggeration to say that I felt these men with me all the time, helping me, judging me, taking notes on my behavior on some spiritual clipboard. I lived to please these men. Now, you may not have grown up in a religious family or playing classical music, so who were your heroes? Who was watching you from the posters on your wall? Were they sports icons, scientists, authors, government or political leaders, artists? Did these men inspire you? Did you try to be like them? Did you feel them watching over you? This brings me to a related concept. It's called the male gaze. It was developed within the art world, and it's another way that men's projections affect women's sense of self. The male gaze was built on a concept proposed by existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, who wrote in 1943 that the act of gazing at another human being creates a subjective power difference, which is felt by both the gazer and by the gazed upon, because the person being looked at is objectified, perceived as an object, not as a human being. Then, in 1972, art historian John Berger wrote a book called Ways of Seeing, which showed how traditional Western art positioned women as subjects of male viewers' gazes, reinforcing a patriarchal power imbalance. He wrote, "Men look at women. Women watch themselves being looked at. This determines not only most relations between men and women, but also the relation of women to themselves. The surveyor of woman in herself is male. The surveyed is female. Thus, she turns herself into an object of vision, a sight." Then, in 1975, British feminist film theorist Laura Mulvey wrote an article called visual pleasure, and narrative cinema, which demonstrates how the female form was often idealized and presented from a voyeuristic male perspective. This happens in all art forms, but interestingly in film, the male gaze has 3 different perspectives. The person behind the camera, who is almost always a man, the main characters interacting with women who are disproportionately men, and then whatever men are watching the movie. Again, the male gaze is a term that comes from the art world, and today we're talking about psychology. But unfortunately, as any girl or woman will tell you, the male gaze doesn't just happen in paintings and film. It happens in real life, starting at a very young age. I remember the first time I wore mascara to school. A boy in my class who I knew had a crush on me told me I looked like a whore. I remember in college, a guy I barely knew walked up to me and pinched my belly and said, "Wow, you've gained weight." And I remember adults in my community, men and women, telling me throughout my entire childhood and teenage years that I needed to dress modestly because boys were imagining things about me and it was my responsibility to keep myself and them pure.
And young women, please understand that if you dress immodestly, you are magnifying this problem by becoming pornography to some of the men who see you.
I wish I had never allowed any of those boys and men access to my mind, but I didn't know it was happening. And even now, I often find myself battling the accumulated voices of men's judgments, or women's voices perpetuating men's judgments, in the deepest, most central part of my psyche. It's like I'm performing even when I'm by myself. Maybe you've seen this phenomenon represented with a different metaphor. In Phoebe Waller-Bridge's brilliant show Fleabag, the main character keeps breaking the fourth wall to make commentary to an audience for whom she's somehow performing her life. She isn't living for herself. She's somehow living as a sort of persona, a mask that's telling a story about herself. When Andrew Scott's character notices her doing the little narration thing, he calls her out and says,
"What was that?
What?
Where did you just go?
What?
You just went somewhere. There. Where'd you just go?
Nowhere.
He can tell that she's not solid and centered in her sense of self. Women, does that metaphor resonate? I'm guessing so, since most of the women I know who have watched Fleabag cry when they talk about it. Men, can you imagine how your self-concept might be different if the vast majority of your role models and people in power all throughout your life were women? Take a moment to imagine that alternate world. So now for some solutions. Several years ago, I noticed how much of my self-concept was derived from the messages of men and how loudly their voices are in my head and how much I've still been living my life as a performance, trying to please them. Lately, I've been making some really meaningful positive changes, and I have 3 pieces of advice. First, have compassion for yourself. If you notice yourself reverting to little girl mode around your dad, or if you find yourself being overly deferential to male professors or male bosses, or trying to prove that you're as smart or strong around your male friends, if you find yourself performing for the male gaze, remember that those habits developed because your brain has been trying to help you succeed and keep you safe in a male-dominated world. Say, "Thank you, brain, for trying to keep me safe." Second, have compassion for other women, especially the women in our lives, like our mothers and grandmothers. But I'm even talking about public figures who can be the most egregious puppets of patriarchy, pick-me girls and trad wives. I know that these women do a lot of harm, and as you can see, I am dedicating my life to challenging their ideas. But they're also real people. And like us, they've grown up swimming in patriarchal water, so it's no wonder that they've absorbed that water. It's all they know. So it's important to prove their ideas wrong, but don't blame or denigrate other women. And third, replace the patriarchal sources of self with your own real self-regard. In the final scene of Fleabag, Phoebe Waller-Bridge decides to stop performing. She looks at the camera the way she always does when she's about to make a quip for the audience, but instead of vacating herself to please the viewer, she shakes her head no. She holds the statue of a woman's body made by her mother, and she says goodbye to the external gaze, walking away with a whole and integrated self. I bawled my eyes out when I watched that scene, but it wasn't until a few years later that it fully hit me why I related to it so much. For me, it wasn't until 2025 that I fully realized that myself had always been crazily disproportionately formed by what men thought of me. God, my dad, maybe Santa Claus, and yes, Mozart and Beethoven, male teachers, male church leaders, teenage boys, even my husband, even just my male friends. And sometimes it's just a vague, amorphous male presence in my head. The great man in our heads that Gerda Lerner talks about. As I've been trying to break down this internalized patriarchy, it hasn't worked for me to tell myself, stop caring about what some dude thinks of you. I have to have something to replace it with. So here's a very real, specific example. Let's say I'm writing a paper, and I think of a really smart idea, and I notice myself performing for some man in my head, maybe a real person I know, or maybe just a nebulous male presence. I stop. I visualize that scene from inside out too. I imagine myself in the middle of a room, and I see that a male gaze is coming from a projector that's plugged in, shining those expectations and judgments at me. I walk over, and I unplug the projector. And while I'm at it, I look around to see if there are any other people's opinions projecting at me, and I unplug them all. Then I walk into the middle of the room, and I invite a few people into my internal family. Gerda Lerner says that we can replace the great man in our heads with the voices of our sisters and our feminist foremothers. And sometimes the family members I want in that sacred space are exactly them, my own sisters, my chosen sisters in the form of kind and loyal women friends, and my feminist foremothers, Christine de Pizan, Mary Wollstonecraft, Bell Hooks. But sometimes I even catch myself performing for those women. Sometimes what I really need to really ground myself is the presence of just two people, the safest, most authentic people to rebuild my sense of self. The first is myself as a little girl. The second is myself as an old woman. I care what they think. I want them to be proud of me, and they are. Instead of pressure and expectations, I feel complete acceptance and love. They remind me that life is way too short to care what other people think. This mental exercise has been the most effective thing I've ever done to remove internalized patriarchy in myself and replace it with inner sovereignty. And think about it, in a way, internal patriarchy is the only form of patriarchy that we have control over anyway. This is essential to the work of breaking down patriarchy in the world, because at the end of the day, patriarchy is not real. It has no physical properties. It exists only in people's minds. And so if enough people unplug patriarchal projections, it vanishes. Thanks for watching. Please tell me in the comments what you've done to deconstruct patriarchy in your own mind. And as always, thank you for every like, every subscribe, and every share. The more interactions this video gets, the more likely it is to pop into other people's feeds who've never thought about these issues before. Thanks for helping me spread the word.